G'day everyone, I am the man called Kemosabe, the man with a plan from the land down under, and this is my review of The Last Goodbye by Richard Embry and Brian Brinley. The Last Goodbye is a very unique crowd-funded indie book in that it depicts real-life fare in a self-contained story. Nothing that happens here is beyond the realm of possibility or believability in our world. Because the story jumps back and forward from the present to the recent past and then again to the distant past, and so many of the story elements are tied into one another, it's difficult to review this book in a way that doesn't give away the ending, which I very much don't want to do because this is an excellent book. I'd like for you to read it yourself. The art's pretty good, it's not great, but it's big and it's open and conveys what's happening with ease. A common critique I have of much of the art for crowd-funded books is the lack of variation of line thickness, something that again is present here. The line work lacks the crispness that I associate with really good physical inking. I guess this was done digitally, which is maybe why it looks kind of heavy-handed in places. Some of the proportions and perspectives are off and could have maybe used some more time in the roughing and penciling stages. But the characters are easily identifiable, and at no point, even with all the time jumps, are you confused as to who is who or where or when a character is. This art does the job of communicating time, action and place confidently and immediately. The colouring is bold and high contrast, maybe too bold and too high contrast. I'd be interested to see how this book looked with a more muted, grimier and painterly colour scheme. The textures are too strong and applied inexpertly. More subtle textures and more of them, layered up and sculpted to fit the contours of the planes they are on, would help add depth to the art on this title. Surprisingly light on action for a comic about a hitman, this is a narration-focused, story-driven comic, unlike many on the crowdfunding scene lately. The Last Goodbye is the story of Edgar Cruz, a hitman and debt collector. This is no glorified Jason Statham movie though, no romantic mafia story of organised crime, honour and brotherhood. This is a gritty, real and very mortal world the characters are dealing with. The events of the comic transpire over what looks like maybe 2 days, but flashbacks to the past add bulk to the story. Unlike other books where I have criticised the use of overly long flashbacks, writer Richard Embry has masterfully made use of Tarantino-like time jumps, allowing past events to add context and weight to the current ones. This isn't some huge exposition dump flashback that takes up half the book. It's a series of reflective vignettes narrated by the protagonist in such a way that we come to understand his otherwise reprehensible choices and his yearning for something more, something better. With refrains of the Red Dead 2 redemption arc, Edgar seems to want to leave the world a little better for his being there and make significant and dangerous sacrifices to try and realise that. Seeing how this desire links to his traumatic childhood and the crushing constraints of his present-day predicament, allow Embry to create a hitman character that is as cynical as most, but more reflective and empathetic than most. If you purchase this comic, you get a complete one-and-done self-contained story with a beginning, middle and end. Like a movie or a good episode of a television series, this comic tells a complete story and gives the reader closure by the end. It might not be a tale you come back to time and time again, but it's well worth owning and definitely worth reading. Next up is Shotgun Samurai by the man, the myth, the legend, the Quaff himself, aka Donkey Madness, aka either Matthews Bello or Dakul Okamoto. The Quaff sent me digital copies of the book for review purposes, but I like it so much that I went and backed it anyway. This is a long-term passion project for the Quaff. He said he started this comic in high school after some prompting from friends to take his humorous scribbles more seriously. With a title like Shotgun Samurai, you probably have a pretty good idea already of what you're in for. What impressed me though was how well Quaff did the stuff you promised to get, and how much more he added besides. This is a guy who very much understands anime and manga, cramming so many familiar conventions of the art forms into his comic, not just in pacing and dialogue, but theme and actual events that happen on the page. It's a classic wandering samurai looking for redemption by helping others story. It's Xena, warrior princess, with kimonos, a shotgun and a better sense of humour. The art starts off pretty raw and simple, but the pacing and panel layout are really good, and it's clear what is happening on each page. The issues are in black and white, lending to that traditional manga feel. I actually think the art style would suffer if it was coloured. Black and white is definitely the proper vehicle to convey Quaff's style. While the art is simple, I don't mean to say it is unsophisticated. For example, at the start of book 2 there is a ninja ambush scene with fluid, flowing action that moves from panel to panel, page to page with a natural fluidity I've rarely, if ever, seen. Quaff is a natural storyteller, and watching this fight unfold on the page is like watching a well-choreographed sword fight on the screen. But impressively, Quaff uses the conventions of the printed page to frame each sword strike, each kick and blow in a way that can only exist in a comic, allowing the placement of the panels to dictate the time between actions, cramming the faster ones so close together they overlap and spreading out the others. I don't know if this guy even knows how good of a storyteller on the page he is. With a little more detail and maybe some grey tones for depth and weight, Shotgun Samurai could easily take things to the next level of sequential storytelling. The looseness of the art helps support the humour in the book. This is a very funny comic with plenty of parts that'll make you laugh out loud. Most prominently Shotgun Samurai's terse reactions, or lack of, to outrageous events and running gags with established characters. Much like the Fast Show, once you know the quirks and habits of the main characters, the humour often comes from them saying or doing those things. You anticipate it, you look out for situations where that will be allowed to happen. Similarly, after a while, once you see the Shotgun Samurai with a bowl of noodles, you know shit's about to go down. Legend says he's never once finished an entire bowl. It becomes an in-joke, something you smile when you see because you're anticipating what comes next. This book is just a lot of fun. You know the Quaff is having fun making it just as you're having fun reading it. It plays on all those anime conventions you know and probably love. The frigid arch-enemy girl assassin turned tsundere love interest, the wizened old man blissfully unaware of the danger he's in, always getting into situations that the protagonist must work to rescue him from. Shotgun Samurai no more wants George the Noodlemaker around than he wants anyone else, but through a tragic turn of events they are stuck with each other. George is Shotgun Samurai's sounding board, the character that grounds him and connects him with humanity. As Subutai is for Schwarzenegger's Conan, so too is George for the Shotgun Samurai. Shotgun Samurai is over 200 pages long. I was gifted 7 issues of the book, and as you'd expect for a humorous story to stay relevant and engaging during an ongoing storyline, things have to get real, stakes have to be raised, and we need to care about the story. Creating well-written scenes that allow the characters' identities to shine, and, like Order of the Stick and Fist of the Dwarf Star before him, what started as a funny, even simple premise turns out being surprisingly emotionally impactful. And when these characters are put in mortal danger, you seriously, genuinely care about the outcome. There's a great conceit that runs through the story where the people of feudal Japan don't know what guns are, let alone a shotgun, so they view the protagonist's weapon as a magic sword that breathes fire. This fuels his legend as he roams the countryside looking for people to help and evildoers to punish, all in the name of redeeming his own horrendous past. Everyone loves a good redemption story. Indeed, the bad guy doing good creates some of the most memorable characters in media, straddling the line between hero and anti-hero, creating identities that can do bad things for a good reason. Shotgun Samurai is a fun, funny, humorous book that will have you laughing, and as the characters grow on you through both serious and silly scenes, you realise you care about the outcome of their struggles. You're emotionally invested in something that probably started as a high school daydream. Hey, imagine if a samurai in feudal Japan had a shotgun. Imagine what would happen. I never imagined I would care so much. This is 200 pages of highly stylized, masterful storytelling. I think some people might have dismissed this book as a joke book or a pure humour book, but like the best anime and manga, Quaff has blended a quirky idea with situational humour as a contrast to the very real, very violent shit-hits-the-fan action that soon explodes onto the page. If Quaff can add just a little more sophistication to his art to capture those people who value comics as a visual medium first and foremost, he'll increase his audience exponentially and receive the acclaim he and his book deserves. Finally, today I'm reviewing Operation Eclipse, Issue 2, written by Ray Marek III with art by Raleigh Akbar. Issue 1 was successfully funded by approximately 170 backers, and Issue 2 gained support from around 130 backers. I recently reviewed the first issue and opined that it was a competent book with many of the right pieces, but it never quite realised its potential. Some of the criticisms I levelled at Operation Eclipse Issue 1 were addressed in Issue 2. Not that I think the direction the book has taken was a result of my review. My main criticism of Issue 1 was that we were told nothing about the titular character's secret identities, motivations, or his actual abilities or equipment. The book had a free comic book day feel to the issue. Competent, with some of the right parts, but not necessarily moving in tandem to produce a great story. This issue covers some of these criticisms, but many of them remain. I had to go check the credits page because, once again, I didn't see an editor credited on this book. An editor could have shifted some stuff around, checked the weighting of different elements, and helped the story flow and move smoother and better. A lot of this review is going to sound negative, and I don't mean for it to, but all of these things I mention are things an editor should raise for the creator's consideration. The fact they haven't is a real blow to what is otherwise a competent comic with lots of potential. So while I'm listing all the things I think should have been done differently, I'm not slagging on the book, I just think it's so close to being good, and it makes me disappointed that these things are holding it back. The book starts with a hero fighting some ski-masked thugs in the park. I'm pretty sure the hero is called Eclipse, but I don't think it's been said in this book yet. It was said twice in Issue 1, but if this is your first issue, he's not called by name until page 18. The title of the book is Operation Eclipse, and the character has expressed a desire to fight corruption within the city, so I would be thinking that Operation Eclipse is his effort to eclipse crime in the city, as opposed to actually being his name. Maybe it's both, but there's a thematic angle here that's being left unused. The hero that we assume is called Eclipse handily defeats the two thugs in the park by drawing his sword. They admit they aren't a real threat and were paid by a photographer to attack Eclipse so the men could take photos of the battle. This bit doesn't flow well and is another example of when an editor should be pointing stuff out. The thugs point to the photographer, who is maybe 30 feet away, max. Eclipse slowly strides towards the guy. He doesn't run, he just walks in his general direction, allowing the photographer, dubbed Aperture, to run away and jump in his car and escape. This page just doesn't work. Why walk? Why not run? It reads flat and awkward and pulls you from the story. This is one of those speed bumps I talk about in my other videos. Elements in a comic that jolt you out of the reading experience and inherently reduce the experience for the reader. I'm not trying to be a dick, but this whole scene doesn't make sense. Most of my issues with this comic are in the same vein. Pacing or art choices that just don't work and reduce the professionalism of the book.
The next 8 pages bounce between Eclipse's home base, where he is shown as having a tinkerer and some kind of comms guy supporting him in his mission, but they aren't really named, introduced, or given a reason to be there besides the nebulous saving their city routine. They talk for 2 pages about the new camera and the night vision goggles they are working on to upgrade Eclipse's gear, but he never actually gets them or uses them in this issue. This is like a blue-balled Chekhov's gun. You talk about night vision goggles, let me see him use night vision goggles in the same issue. Otherwise the whole "I'm making night vision goggles for you but you can't use them yet" scene is wasted pages in this issue. There are months between campaigns and therefore months between issues. You can't pace issues 1, 2 and 3 of a crowd-funded book like they're going to be read a month apart, because they won't be. We are clued into a conspiracy that was in play at the end of issue 1 that I frankly forgot about at first because it was so long ago that issue 1 came out. Some of the guys involved with the ambush of Eclipse is planning on buying out the assets of a dying billionaire from the billionaire's reluctant heir. Eclipse, in his civilian identity, literally bumps into these guys, one of whom he went to high school with. He then gets his intel guys to dig up what they can on the businessman. I'm not sure why he did that. There's no mention of Eclipse being aware that they're doing anything untoward, or that their employer is a criminal of any sort. It'd only have taken one mention that Eclipse was investigating Santiago, the employer, for me to accept that he had a reason to be there and a reason to dig into the men's lives. As it stands, it seems random and unlikely that Eclipse would run into these guys and then would open an investigation into these 3 men simply because they are doing what appears to be completely legal business together. Book 1 felt like we were dropped in the middle of an ongoing story with very little orientation or backfill. I expected some of this backfill, this orientation and explanation would therefore come in issue 2, but it's just not here. We are oriented for what's going to happen moving forward, but I still don't know anything about Eclipse, how he got where he is and why he does what he does. I don't need a full-length, in-depth origin story, but some hints that it would be good. Some sort of hook that makes me believe he cares so I can care. Eclipse confronts Blade, who has set him up for another ambush. Edge returns and brings with him ninjas. Eclipse is outnumbered and overwhelmed until Stinger, who looks like a palette-swapped female version of him, arrives and evens the odds. Edge escapes, Blade agrees to swap sides and join Eclipse to fight Santiago, and Stinger admits she was following Eclipse but won't say why before she takes off and Eclipse is left behind bewildered. The pacing in this book is all over the place. So much stuff is left unsaid, and a lot of things happen that don't make sense. I suspect, again, that the author isn't a native English speaker. A lot of the dialogue is repetitive and doesn't always make sense. There's a lot of missing commas and omitted words that affect how the book reads. I'm not being petty, dialogue is the most important bit of text in a comic, and when that's missing commas it reads wrong and it ruins the flow of the narrative. Yes, a single comma can ruin your whole page. Maybe not everyone will notice, but enough people will. You do it a few times and your whole book looks less professional for it. There's a lot of repeated phrases and words. Here, Eclipse is saying cool twice in the same panel. There's no need for that. Here, Gadget Guy tells Eclipse to suit up. Eclipse says, yeah, I need to suit up and visit an old friend. And then the next panel he says, time to visit an old friend. 4 panels, 2/3 of a page has been used to tell me something that could have been done in 1. Then you have other places where things are condensed and rushed. Some of this space could have been used to alleviate the pressure of condensed pacing elsewhere in the book. In this scene, Eclipse has his sword sheathed. Then he grabs a sword from Blade's display. But his sword is gone from his sheath and remains gone for the rest of the fight. These are little things, yes, but there's a lot of them in the book. They add up. Here, Edge decides he's had enough and he bails. He leaps out the window, and rather than have Eclipse or Stinger follow him, because that would interrupt the narrative the author has planned, the camera cuts to Blade, explaining that Edge had a getaway plan. It's implying Edge had something worked out that allowed him to escape because the author didn't want Eclipse chasing the villain. He wanted a cryptic debrief with Stinger. This is like all those Resident Evil cutscenes where Wesker backs into an elevator or huge closing doors and escapes the heroes laughing manically. He has to escape because the story would be over, or at least drastically altered, if he was caught so early on. It's a contrivance, it's for convenience's sake, and there are too many of them in this issue. Give the guy a jetpack or some kind of getaway drone or helicopter, not a speech balloon telling us he got away but not how. It's lazy plotting and downright insulting writing. It happens again not even 2 pages later, when Stinger jumps off the building and leaves Eclipse with more answers than questions. He could have stopped her, he could have chased her, he could have followed her like she was following him. But because the author didn't want to write that confrontation or that scene, Eclipse gets to hold the idiot ball for a while longer. The designs in this book are cool, the art is above average, and the fights are well drawn, even if there is a little too much 3D reference going on in some panels. The elements of a decent street-level vigilante story are present, but in the wrong order and in the wrong amounts. I talk often of branding your character, having them do something cool and characterful and uniquely them. Brand them, crystallise who they are and why they do what they do in the minds of the readers as soon as possible. You can hold off on some stuff for later. We don't need the whole life story, but make them stand out from the story. At this point, I don't care about Eclipse. He's generic. I don't know why he does what he does. He lacks the intensity of Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne or the vulnerability and solitude of Ben Affleck's Daredevil. We don't have a destroyed planet and 2 dead fathers like Christopher Reeve had. I don't know why Eclipse cares, and if he doesn't care, how can I be expected to care?